Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show, I thought I'd title 5, 50, and 500. The 5 is easy. We're entering our 5th year of Marjohn's Musings here at Cape Ann TV. I can't believe that. I look back and I think of my first couple of shows where I was protesting the shutdown of the government of the United States by the Tea Party, and how angry I was that our elected officials could put their own political agendas above the safety and the security of the United States of America. I came in here and I did an hour-long filibuster, a citizen's filibuster. People liked it. They said, come on back and do another one. They're still out. And so I came back and I did a second one. And then the government went back to work, and I heaved a huge sigh of relief, and I thought, oh, great. The United States is safe, sound, and secure, and I can get on with life. And it just so happened that the Red Sox won the World Series, and I came in dressed in a red outfit and toasted them and stuff. I wore my cowboy hat because it was heading into October and the show was going to be shown over the Halloween holiday, and I thought, great. Well, this will be our 48th episode. I have the privilege to be invited onto someone else's show now. I'm going to be on Karen Jacobs' show in November. I don't know when it will air. I don't know if it will air. I tend to be a little bit outspoken and not necessarily politically correct. My favorite show was the Pink Hat Show. And unfortunately, I had to bring my pink hat back in today. I was listening yesterday to the president's speech at the United Nations. I don't know what to say. 40 minutes. I don't know how many times he said the United States, as if the people listening to him didn't know where he was from. I have to make an official apology to the leader of North Korea. When I asked my husband, how does that man pronounce his name? He said Kim Jong-un, like think Carl Jung. And so I spelled his name like Carl Jung, when everybody else pronounce it Jung and then spell it J-O-N-G, Kim Jong-un. I was stunned, speechless, to hear the President of the United States call the leader of another country.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
And then threaten to obliterate an entire country.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
In front of the UN, after talking about national sovereignty and peaceful relations and mutually beneficial trade agreements and a whole lot of political rhetoric. Because if you're willing to obliterate an entire country, what does that say about your dedication to peace? I have an old CD from a motion picture, Meet Joe Black. Yeah, the storyline is that a business executive has chest pains, and he asks, am I going to die? I don't think he actually says it aloud, but he does ask, at least in his own mind and heart, and the answer is yes. And that's how the movie begins. It's like the soundtrack starts out, yes, you are going to die. Well, the Buddha told people, it's not a matter of if you're going to die, it's a matter of when you're going to die. It's not a matter of if you'll get sick. Nearly everyone gets sick. But I sat there listening to my president, and whether I like him or not, unless he's impeached or voted out of office, he's my president until the next election. Whether you like him or not, he's your president as well. If you don't like what he's doing, you need to make that known to your public officials in Congress. It's hard. Some people are very proud of Donald Trump for standing up to Kim Jong-un. But I look at the situation with Japan 55 miles away by sea and South Korea's capital city 20 miles away by land. And the idea of collateral damage scares the life out of me. So what about the 50? Well, the 50 it's the 50th anniversary of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Lyndon Baines Johnson signs that document into law on November 7th. But since I was doing a show for October, I thought I'd pop that in there because this is the year. And because I was going to be talking about Lyndon Baines Johnson, I decided to watch Ken Burns' Vietnam special. It's a multi-night docudrama. As of last night, we made it up to 1965, and I listened as letters from Ho Chi Minh were intercepted by the CIA and never delivered to President Truman. And the certainty in the United States government that if a free election was held in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh would win. And that we interfered with that because we were afraid of an ideology. For the young people in the audience, it was called the domino theory. And we were afraid if communism got a hold and began to spread, the entire world might become communist. Now you have to cut the people in power at the time a little bit of a break because they just survived World War II, where Hitler was going to take over the world, and they'd been in this horrible war that ended in a stalemate in North Korea. But the idea that they knew that the people of Vietnam wanted a particular person in power, and that subterfuge was used so that the President of the United States did not know that Ho Chi Minh was asking for his aid to be liberated from French imperialism. The way the 4th of July is celebrated here in the United States, for the United States being liberated from British imperialism. We had a great deal in common with the Vietnamese. The documentary is distressing in a lot of ways, not least of which the gore of human suffering and the mismanagement and the errors in judgment and the blatant attempts to keep the people of the United States from understanding what was going on, because our leadership knew if we knew the truth, we wouldn't support the war. Well, through brave journalists, we began to find out the truth, and through surviving soldiers who came home, we began to find out the truth. I can remember being on Commonwealth Avenue as a Boston University student and watching Kerry burning draft cards with young students at BU because he was against the draft. He felt like if you wanted to be a Marine or a soldier or a sailor, there were recruitment offices you could sign up and you could defend your country and you could be patriotic and you could go to war and you could do what needed to be done. But to draft someone, to make someone go, and then force them to kill other people, that was a hard thing. And the idea of being a conscientious objector translated loosely to coward at that time. I kind of wish that the series had progressed to 1967, because 1966, 1967 is when I set my book, Saigon's Deadly Game. I also wish I had access to the powerful documentary of these people testifying to their life experience there before I wrote my book, because I think the book would have been quite different. I had first-hand testimony of a schoolmate of mine who was taken as a POW, and his rendition of what happened to someone he met in the torture hut. So I based my book on that. There was a lot that I didn't know. Visuals I'd never seen, sounds recorded by camera, video camera, that I'd never heard, that I would have woven into the tale if I'd known them. It left me feeling at odds and distressed. Like I told you last show, my husband had been in Texas at Fort Sam Houston and came home right after a huge storm hit, but right before Hurricane Harvey hit. And then, not so many days later, Irma smashed Barbuda, came across the U.S. Virgin Islands, and hit the Florida Keys, where my sister lives, or lived. She's been evacuated. She's living in a hotel. She spent 3 days without electricity. They couldn't find food. And she can't go home because the storm surge has mixed sewage into the drinking water. There are a lot of dead animals that are decomposing, a lot of dead plant matter, and the water sources are polluted and contaminated. There is no potable water. The last I knew, there was no electricity. My sister's a nurse. She has an emergency generator. I gather that the winds and the rain were so intense that it disabled the safety features on the generator at her home, and all her foodstuffs spoiled and now have to be dealt with. And today, when I woke up, I was in a gray haze. I have a window at my house up on the second floor, and on a clear day I can see blue water out past Back Beach. I didn't see the water. There was fog all the way up to the house in the pelting rain. And the 500, well, October 31st in 1517, Martin Luther, a monk, a Catholic monk, tacked 95 theses to be debated to the church wall. One of the most powerful parts of that was he took on the selling of indulgences. The popes, to raise money to build the great cathedrals and raise armies to fight the Crusades and whatever else not, began using their positions of power to generate revenue. And one of the ways, besides the tithe, where they took 1/10 of everything produced by their faithful, was the selling of indulgences. And what that was, if you sinned, the Pope would sell you this certificate that shortened the time you would have to spend in purgatory. So I purchased the book, Here I Stand, and I also watched a docudrama with a lot of footage out of a movie about Martin Luther. The two presenters were quite different, and I have to confess I haven't finished Here I Stand. It's thick going. But it talks about Martin Luther as a man who was struck by lightning and asked for intercession from St. Anne, his father's patron saint. I found that interesting because as a child, my grandmother was a very devout Catholic, and she prayed to several saints. And when I was a kid, I was a bit like Martin Luther. I asked the unpolite question, why isn't the emperor wearing his clothes? You know, I was that kid. I have the yardstick scars to prove it. The idea of needing intercession really struck me. I had a dispute with PayPal, which is a great big corporation. They closed one of my accounts, a deposit account, a debit card account, with money in it, and they refused to give me back my money. And they're PayPal, and I'm me. What was I going to do? Well, there was a class action suit, and I could have thrown my name into the ring as one of the people. But I gather that the class action suit won, because I got this thing in my email about unclaimed funds, and if you don't claim your funds, we're going to turn them over to the state. So 3 different times I attempted to claim my funds, and they put up roadblocks in my way. I finally decided to go to my TD Bank, and I asked Mariani Tanani if she would help me to get my funds back. And she said, I don't know if I can, but I'll give it a try. She's the assistant vice president at the Gloucester TD Bank, and she got on the phone with them and kept them on the phone until we got the transfer made and I got my money back. Now, it wasn't quite $200, so it's not a great victory, but it was the principle of the thing. And I think for Martin Luther, a lot of his objections to the theocracy that pretty much ran the world at the time, the world that he knew, he wanted to point out situations in which he felt that the church, the Catholic Church was not living up to the mandates given to them by Jesus. So the Protestant Reformation occurred. But in that book, Here I Stand, there were other players besides Martin Luther. And there's a great many churches right here in the United States, but also throughout the world, that picked up some, if not all, of Martin Luther's tenets. I was absolutely stunned to find out that Hitler felt inspired by Martin Luther. That took me aback. And then the commentators were talking about how Hitler used Martin Luther for his own ends and interpreted Martin Luther in his own way, but that a black man who becomes famous through his son, Martin Luther King, also discovered Martin Luther. Martin Sr. He came home from Germany having discovered Martin Luther and said, from now on, we're going to be Martin Luther King Sr. and you're going to be Martin Luther King Jr. And for the progeny of slaves to claim the title king or prince, you know, the man formerly known as Prince, yeah, to claim a royal title was a big deal because society was for a long time segregated into classes, with the nobility and the upper class and the bourgeois and the workers and then the poor peasants and then the debtors at the bottom. But I wanted to thank Mariana because she interceded for me, and as a representative of a multinational bank, she got much better results than I did. I brought you in a National Geographic. This one is The Science of Addiction. There were some statistics in here that startled me. 91 Americans die each day from opioid overdoses. And there's this old expression, a picture worth 1,000 words. This photo is called Casual Drinkers. And on the following page, there's a statistic that just blew my mind. 3.3 million worldwide die each year from alcohol. I was a little sad that they didn't talk about sugar because that's my addiction. I'm addicted to sugar. And you can see that. You know, I'm huge. I didn't used to be huge. I went to my college friend's third wedding. I've talked to you before about Naomi, but since I started this show, she's had like a fairy tale romance. Her college sweetheart, who invited her to run away from Tufts University and go off to Oregon back in the early 1970s, found her again after 30 years. And I had the privilege to go to the wedding. And it was held in a lovely arboretum. And I was a little jealous. She still wears the same dress size she wore when the two of us were occupational therapy students. I was going to BU and she was going to Tufts, and she still wears that same dress size. So I was kind of anxious about going to this wedding and seeing her family and her friends, some of whom had not seen me in decades. And what would they think, you know, I had turned into this cow, you know, moo. And what would I wear to this event, and I went to Marshall's and found pantyhose. These are Kenzie silky sheer hosiery, and instead of being like $15, $20, they were like $3.99. I thought, great, I'll have stockings to wear to this wedding. And they say they go up to 210 pounds. I thought, good enough. I just wanted, I thought that was like priceless. Fortunately, I bought 2 packs in case I got what the Brits would call a ladder in your hose. And I thought, yeah, if I get a ladder in my hose, I want a second pair here. And I opened the first pair prior to packing and found out that I might get my left leg in there, but there's no way I'm getting his booty into that. And it got me to thinking about our expectations. Like, what do we expect of ourselves or others? There's been news recently from Cuba that the employees at the American embassy have been suffering dizziness and nausea and headaches. I've told you before, I do sound healing, and I'm reading a new book for me by Liz Cooper of what is sound healing. She has some interesting ideas. I use Tibetan singing bowls, but I also have flutes, everything from a piccolo to a contrabass flute, and I have the harp. But when I found my space, which is on the bearskin neck, I can see the back of motif number 1. As I shared with you in a previous show, if the tides are right and we get a storm, waves strike motif number 1. I'm not elevated above that, and I did not want to bring an instrument that costs as much as a car into a situation where it could get water damaged. And I wasn't able to get insurance because I was in a hail and storm area. My sister has applied for FEMA. Between Harvey and Irma and Katrina, FEMA's been hit real hard. I'm wondering if there'll be enough funding. I heard a pundit talking about how we shouldn't help people who were injured by this hurricane season because some of them have had to rebuild several times. I thought about that in reference to what Donald Trump said about the North Korean leader allowing how many thousands of his people to die of starvation. And it was an accusation. And I sat there thinking, and you never once thought that the sanctions, economic sanctions, Americans and their allies have imposed on North Korea so that they cannot sell their goods or services outside the country to bring in a cash flow, might have contributed to that starvation. And even though there's a friendly border with South Korea right near North Korea, we could have catapulted foodstuffs over the border. I don't know that we made a sufficient effort to quell the starvation of the North Korean people. I looked at what was done to the villagers in Vietnam, video footage that was not photoshopped of us burning out villages because there were Viet Cong. And one of the Vietnamese commentators said, you could have a village where only one man believed in the Viet Cong. And if you went into that village and arrested him and burnt the village to the ground, every survivor would believe in the Viet Cong. My husband said the same thing happened in Iraq, that looking for Al-Qaeda, which was the forerunner to ISIS, they would kick down doors, knock the man of the family to the floor, face down, hold a rifle to his head in front of his wife and children and interrogate him. If the man lived, he would become a terrorist because he had been humiliated in front of his family. So I thought about Lyndon Baines Johnson and John Fitzgerald Kennedy, knowing for years that they could not win the war in Vietnam, and sending Americans to fight it anyway, and to fight it by killing Vietnamese, so that America didn't lose face. I thought of Martin Luther. 6 hours in the confessional, trying to confess every sin he ever made, to be assured that he could go to heaven, and his confessor becoming aggravated with him, because to remember the sins that he had committed, he would go through the 7 deadly sins and the 10 commandments, because he thought you had to expunge every sin to be assured a place in heaven. Finally, his confessor told him, God is not angry with you. You are angry with God. And he wound up in Wittenberg because his mentor thought that if he had to minister to the poor and help save other people's souls, he'd stop focusing so much on his own. I lost count of the number of times Donald Trump said the United States in his speech to the UN, at around 17. And the speech went on for more minutes, quite a few more minutes. I brought you in some things to show you today. I told you that I crochet, but my knitting and crochet is not subtle or refined like Martin Luther's intellect. My knitting is kind of, chunky and simplistic. So when I find things like at second glance where someone has crocheted something lovely like this little snowflake design, or something classical like this lovely linen flame, I decided I would go ahead and buy a book on how to knit and crochet lace patterns. Unfortunately, the finer the yarn or thread you use, the finer the product, but also the more delicate. And most of the truly stunning, precious-looking pieces, like this one, wind up with damage because they're so delicate. In the days when women spent their days embroidering and crocheting and tatting prior to TV, some of the pieces they made were exquisite, and yet the finest ones, the truly finest, most refined ones, are the ones that frequently are easily damaged. This one has a cross shape with roses and other flowers. It's truly stunning, but the little gauze gave way. I saw this and I brought it home. It's the exterior embroidery on this gauze material that at one time went around a silk handkerchief. And the silk, being an organic fiber from the silkworm, deteriorates, and the little hanky no longer has its center. I thought perhaps one day I would trace it out and put a silk center on that hanky. When I was a little girl, my father took me to see Disney's Fantasia, and I watched Magic Mickey, you know, dun 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 dun. And he has the mops and buckets coming down the stairs, and he's orchestrating this cleaning spree. And he's doing it in such a way that he's not actually doing the work. He's using magic means to do the work. And I thought about our president standing up in front of the United Nations and threatening to obliterate his country after publicly humiliating and shaming him about the starvation of his people in a situation where the United States prevents North Korea from enjoying free trade like other nations. And if you've ever seen Fantasia, the mops start carrying more and more and more buckets of water until the entire area that Mickey is supposed to clean up is awash, like Houston, like the Keys. And before it gets so far out of hand, like Barbuda, the senior wizard comes in and chastises him and sets everything to rights. By the time you're the President of the United States, your senior wizard is the Almighty. There's hardly anybody above you, not that I can think of anyway, not at the moment. So Kevin and I went to this bittersweet wedding where my girlfriend got married for the third time in her 60s. She dyed her hair, she got a tan, she wore a sleeveless dress, she looked amazing. I would have guessed her for 20 years younger than she was. And this is just 2-3 weeks after she lost her kid brother to a brain tumor. I talked to her youngest son, who has a beautiful girlfriend. They've been dating for 8 years. I said, hey, when the two of you going to tie the knot? You know, you're a committed couple. And he pulls me aside and says, Marjohn, I'm never going to have children. And she wants children. And it struck me that his grandmother died of one type of brain tumor and his uncle just died of a different type of brain tumor. I'm in at my annual physical talking to my nurse, and I mentioned that I'm distressed about this, and she said, well, there's more reasons for not wanting to have children, because I suggested, hey, Marcel, you could adopt. And he looked at me and he smiled sadly, and I didn't understand what he didn't say. And my nurse said to me, of course you don't want to pass that time bomb on to your children. 2 first-order relatives with the same genetic defect. But you don't want to have children, even adopted children, if you're not going to be there to raise them. I almost fell off my chair. Had a lot to think about with all this. But I want to tell you a couple of fun things. We took the puppies on this trip because Dax is too young to go to the kennel. He's not allowed to have the kennel cough shot yet. And we were coming back in the morning on Monday, and for whatever reason, we didn't manage to get breakfast as we were leaving the hotel, and we wanted to get on the road before we hit rush traffic in New York City coming back up to Boston. And we saw this sign from the highway, and I said, hey, let's go there. They had a sign for brunch, and we wound up in a place called Barcelona. And we sat there and ate tapas outside at a picnic table in a fenced area where we could put Dax and Cookie Monster. And we had this lovely brunch, and I told the manager that I would mention it. His name is Robert Atkinson, and he and his staff were wonderful to me. And he said, you know, there are Barcelona up in Massachusetts, because we were in Connecticut at the time. He's like, yeah, there's Barcelona up in Massachusetts. So I'm going to see if I can find it. We had wonderful stuff. We had spicy eggplant caponata, and we had bacon-wrapped dates. Oh my goodness. Sweet, salty, and savory all at the same time. We had cheeses, a plate of cheeses. It was fun sitting out in the sun with the puppies on the lawn, and it kind of brightened my mood from all my worries. So my son, knowing that I'd had kind of this stressful couple of weeks, gave me this great thing. It's a 3D viewer that you can do virtual reality. And you pop this on your head, look out through the lenses, and you put your cell phone into the apparatus and close the box so that you can see the virtual reality images. He said, be careful, Mom, because it's either violent games or porno. I was like, oh, great. You know, so I haven't downloaded any apps because he knows I don't like violence. I'm not all that, you know, porno's not my thing either. So I have projects for myself now. I went to my alma mater, to Boston University's alumni weekend, and I went to see the work of Tipper Gore. She was well-spoken. Her photographs were amazing. And afterward, I approached someone I knew. I'm a BU grad, so some of the professors are acquaintances of mine. And I said, she didn't mention the new movie, Truth to Power. And the woman looked at me like I was an idiot and said, well, that's Al's movie. And I'm thinking, yeah. She goes, you didn't know that they're divorced? I was like, oh. And I had to confess that I don't monitor the personal lives of celebrities. I feel like it's kind of none of my business. And I felt awkward, you know. So Tipper and Al are divorced, and they have been for years, and somehow I didn't register that in my brain. But I am going to go see Truth to Power. It's going to be playing right here in Gloucester. I was thinking about political leadership as being a civic form of service, maybe even a duty. Tipper challenged the students who had come to her lecture, and also the alums who had come to the lecture, that they needed to get out into the world to protect the poor and the weak, the mentally ill, the physically handicapped, the wounded veterans, the orphans, the aging. There's a new t-shirt. I'm thinking about buying it. It took the Statue of Liberty and one of the campaign slogans from Hillary Clinton, and it says, "I'm with her." I think I might buy that. And Hillary, what happened? Haven't got through that yet either, but I will. I've been invited to be a guest speaker on Karen Jacobs' show. Karen Jacobs is a professor of occupational therapy in the doctoral program at Boston University, and I got an email from her saying, hey, if you want to see what my show's like, take a peek at this video. Now, one of her videos has 4,000 views on YouTube, above and beyond the people that saw it on their television when it was first broadcast. She uses a public access station down in Brookline, sort of like Cape Ann TV. And the 4,000 view plus video is on how to fit a backpack so that you don't wind up with a backache or shoulder problems, especially if the backpack is loaded with heavy books, like many backpacks are these days. But the one that she sent me the link to was about emergency preparedness. And I thought I would remind you about potable water. This is 5 gallons of potable water. And according to what her doctoral student said on her show about emergency preparedness, that would be just about enough for 2 people for 3 days, not for bathing, not for washing dishes, not for any other use of water than just to drink it, just drinking water. I'm wondering, you know, what are we doing for the folks at Harvey? And when will my kid sister be able to leave the hotel she's living in and go home? I said to my sister, I said, come on up and stay with me. I've got heat, I've got light, I've got food, we've got gas. I'll send you money for an airplane ticket. You know, I'll buy your ticket. You go to the airport, it'll be there waiting for you. You can do that online now. And she was hesitant. she has her son and her significant other and her friends, and so far she hasn't shown up. And she said, hey, don't invite me, you've got Jose coming. Well, Jose is now kind of pummeling the Cape and Islands, but it's not a direct hit, and it's nowhere near as big as Maria or Irma or Harvey. But I told her at the time, I said, we won't get hurricane as our storms. I don't know if you remember, but I showed photos of my husband with snow up to his eyebrows. That's the type of storm we're likely to have. And watching Karen Jacobs' show about emergency preparedness, I thought, it might be good for the people of Cape Ann to go on the Red Cross website and learn what we need to do to be prepared for a winter storm. I don't know how many meters of snow Harvey would have dumped if Harvey'd been a winter storm and not a late summer storm. Like an inch of rain is a whole lot more snow. And depending on the type of snow, it can be quite a bit more. That light, fluffy stuff mounts up quick. So do me a favor, if you watch the show, take the time, contact your city hall or your local Red Cross and find out, what do you need to do for yourself to be prepared with potable water, some sort of light, maybe not necessarily just candles, like battery-powered LEDs and stuff, non-perishable food stuff, and if you needed to evacuate, have a kit ready to go in your car that also protects your pets, pet food, pet bedding, leash and stuff, all that ready to jump into a car. Say a prayer that my Patty gets home safe, and say another prayer that my friend Naomi finds love and contentment with her new partner. That's all for now. This is Marjohn Love, and this has been Marjohn's Musings.